Good morning, my friends. How are you? It's Monday morning. Happy Monday. Um, it is cloudy today, but it's not supposed to rain, so I hope you still get to go out there and play. We are reading Front Desk. We're gonna try to get through a few chapters today. We're on chapter 20, and I'm gonna try to read through, I think I said chapter 22 because 21 was kind of long. Yeah, so I think we're going to read through chapter 22. Um, so let's get started. Here we go. Ready? Chapter 20. I ran up the stairs two at a time, holding the book from the library, the one with the essay contest printed out on it. I couldn't wait to tell my parents. Before I could open my mouth, my mother looked at my book and frowned. Another new book, she said. You should be spending more time doing math, something you can actually get good at. Then she became all nostalgic. You know, when I was your age, I used to eavesdrop on my brother's math lessons. Yeah. I didn't have time for this. I'm not you, Mom, I exclaimed. The words came shooting out of my mouth, and my mom flinched. I'm sorry. I just mean, well, maybe I like something else. Like what? She asked. She put her broom down and crossed her arms. I bit my lips. Like writing? English writing? She asked. Like it was the most preposterous, such a good word, preposterous thing in the world. Ridiculous, right? Like I just said, basket weaving. I nodded. You heard Mr. Yao. You gotta be native in English. And I'm sorry, but we're just not. Mr. Yao, since when was he an expert on anything other than meanness? You can, however, be native at math. I don't want to be native at math, my mom frowned. You're not getting it, are you? She said. She sat down on the bed and looked me in the eye. You just can't be as good as the white kids in their language, honey. It's their language. My gaze sank to the floor. As I dragged myself out of my room, my mother called after me. Someday you'll thank me. She's wrong, I told myself. She was wrong to the power of infinity. I thought about picking up the phone to call Lupe, but instead I flipped on the TV. A rerun of The Simpsons was playing. I stared at Marge Simpson with her big hair and easygoing smile. Marge, to me, was like the perfect American mom, so warm and forgiving that even if Bart was setting the house on fire, she'd continue chatting with her sisters on the phone. Maybe he just needs more love, she'd say. Sometimes I wondered what it would be like to have an American mom just for a day. I could eat all the chocolate chip cookies I wanted because American moms on TV were always baking them, or making casseroles, or organizing birthday parties with themes. I'll tell you what they were not doing. They weren't pestering their kids to do more math. Whatever. I'd show her. She didn't even have to know about the essay contest. One day, it'd just be like, hey, can you pass the chopsticks? Oh, and by the way, I won the motel. Mr. Yao's car roared into the motel and interrupted my daydreaming. I flipped off the TV as he and Jason walked up the front office. It's important, son, that you understand every part of family business, Mr. Yao said to Jason as they stepped in. But I don't understand why we have to do this now, Jason protested. Do what now? I asked. Mr. Yao lifted up the front desk divider so that he and Jason could join me behind the desk. Today, Jason's going to do your job, Mr. Yao announced. He's going to check customers in. You've got to be kidding me. Jason was not a natural checker-inner. For one, he didn't have good customer service skills like me, no surprise there, but he also had basic problems figuring out the math. So it's $20 a night plus tax, he told a customer while his father watched and I stood behind them. The customer gave him $100 bill and wanted change. Jason struggled to calculate the tax, which in Anaheim, California was 13%. Ah, do you have a calculator? He asked me. It's $22.60, I told him. I checked so many people in by now. 2260 was tattooed in my mind. Don't forget, I need two rooms. the customer reminded him. Right, Jason said. He pulled out his hand and tried to do the math in the air with his fingers. So that's 2 times 26, Mr. Yao yelled. You can't figure that out, or you can't figure what that is? Hang on, just give me a second, Jason said. He bit his lip. You gotta carry the one. Excuse me. And then add the Mr. Yao shook his head and stomped into the manager's quarters. After Jason finally figured out the math and gave the customer his keys, we went to find his father. He was in the kitchen. I did it. I checked in my first customer, Jason told his dad proudly. His father didn't say anything. Well, how'd I do? Jason asked. Mr. Yao breathed in and out, looking like he was trying to contain a wildfire and was failing. How'd you do? You were awful. A disgrace. All that using your fingers to do the math. What are you, 5? Jason's face turned beet red. Your math isn't even as good as the girls. Mr. Yao spat the words at him as he eyed Jason up and down. God, you embarrass me. It was his first time, I said in Jason's defense. Yeah, well, he screwed up, Mr. Yao growled. He stared at Jason long and hard to make sure his words sank in. I looked down. I could see the whites of Jason's knuckles. Afterwards, when Mr. Yao went out to talk to my parents, I walked over to Jason. He was sitting by himself in the corner in the front office. I knew exactly what he was feeling because I had felt it just a couple of hours ago when my mom yelled at me. It's okay, I said softly. Jason shook his head. Don't, he said. I put my hand on his shoulder anyway. He jerked his body away. Just don't. Chapter 21. Pounding woke us up at dawn the next day, ear-splitting pounding like someone was attacking the front office door with a jackhammer. I jumped out of bed. Mr. Lawrence, one of the customers from the night before, was standing in front of the front office. Quickly, my dad buzzed him in. My car, Mr. Lawrence shrieked. It's gone. Mr. Lawrence's green Ford Thunderbird had been taken in the middle of the night. He had parked it right in front of his room 5, and when he woke up, it was gone. Hi, Amit. Sorry, my boys are saying hi to me. We have to find out who did this, I said, turning to my parents. You think it was one of our other customers? I immediately grabbed the customer logbook to see who stayed here last night. Could have been anybody, Mr. Lawrence said. Somebody could have come in here in the middle of the night and taken off with my car. I made a mental note to add parking lot gate to my wish list. My father picked up the phone. Hello, Mr. Yao? My dad said. Something terrible has happened. Mr. Yao arrived half an hour later. How could this happen? He said to my mom and dad, gesturing angrily with his hands. We don't know, my dad said. We're just as surprised as you. Mr. Yao picked up the phone and called the police. After that, he went around from room to room, waking up all the customers. Have you seen a green Ford Thunderbird? He asked them, peering suspiciously into their rooms. One of the guests said he did hear some noise at 3 a.m., like someone was trying to start their car. Mr. Yao turned to my dad. Did you see anybody leaving at 3 a.m.? He asked. My dad sheepishly admitted that he didn't know. He had been sleeping. To which Mr. Yao frowned and said, Stop sleeping. Mr. Yao then asked us if there were any customers who left without checking out. My dad and I went to check if anyone had gone in the middle of the night, and sure enough, when we went around, we found 5 keys. We gave Mr. Yao the numbers of the rooms and the names of the customers. Mr. Yao wanted to know what the customers looked like. I tried to describe them as best I could. Let's see, Mr. Roberta had a mustache, I said, but it wasn't one of those long, archy ones. It was a small and tidy one. And Mrs. Robinson, she was about the same height as my mom, a little taller. I closed my eyes trying to recall any other details about her. She had long curly black hair past her shoulders, not in braids like some other black women, I said. Mr. Yao's eyes bulged. Wait a minute, she's black? He yelled. I thought I told you not to rent to bad people. My throat went dry. I could hear the sound of my breathing, hard and fast. You said bad people, not black people. Any idiot knows black people are dangerous, Mr. Yao said. That's not true. I was stunned. Hank's not dangerous, for one. I narrowed my eyes at Mr. Yao. You're the one who's dangerous. Mia, my dad said nervously. My dad turned to Mr. Yao. Sir, we can't judge someone based on their skin color. It isn't right. This is America. Mr. Yao snorted. If you really believe that, you're dumber than I thought, he said. Clearly, you have no idea how this country really works. The sound of police cars pulling in made us look up. What's going on in here? The police officers asked when they stepped in. There were two officers, both male and white. They had lots of things on their uniforms, sticks hanging from their belt, radios and walkie-talkies, which they talked into as they walked up and down, up to the front desk, and guns. I stared at their guns. Mr. Yao quickly filled them in on what happened. From the familiar way they talked with him, it seemed like they knew him. I wondered if the cops had been to the Cala Vista before. Mr. Yao handed them the list of customers who had left in the middle of the night. He told them he thought it was Mrs. Robinson who stole Mr. Lawrence's car. He went so far as to circle Mrs. Robinson's name and write down the word black next to it. And where is Mrs. Robinson now? The officer asked. She left. But I really don't think, I started to say. The officers cut me off with a sharp shh. They only wanted to hear from Mr. Yao. Mr. Yao proceeded to tell the officers about the other customers. They seemed particularly interested in hearing about the Weeklies. Are they home? Can we interview them? Absolutely, Mr. Yao said, leading the way outside. The Weeklies were outside talking about what happened. At the sight of Mr. Yao walking over, Hank quickly moved his tomato plant into the room. Mr. Yao did not like Hank growing plants outside his room. He and Hank hadn't rented that space. Oh, he said Hank hadn't rented that space. The cops walked up to the Weeklies. We'd like to ask you guys some questions, the cop said. How long have you been living here? About 3 weeks. About 3 months, Billy Bob said. I was staying over at days before. One of the officers turned to Hank and asked, And you? About 6 months, Hank told him. The officer jotted it down. Do you have a job? He asked Hank. Yeah, I work over at the gas station on Orange and Knott, he said. What's this about? Fred asked. You think we did it? Mrs. Q put a hand to her chest and let out a shrill, Good God! Sir, ma'am, we're not saying that. We're just asking questions, the cop said. But you're asking the wrong people, I interjected. They ignored me. As they carried on interrogating the Weeklies, I kept trying to interrupt. But every time I tugged on their shirt, the police officer said, Please don't touch me. Finally, they told the Weeklies they could all go back to their rooms. As the Weeklies started walking back to their rooms, one of the officers pulled Hank aside. Except for you, he said. Why me? Hank said. Because I said so, the cop said, staring Hank down. The Weeklies looked at Hank, and Hank looked at them. Then he nodded and told them to go without him. After the other Weeklies left, both cops turned their attention back to Hank. Now, where were we? You said you work at the Orange and Knot? The commanding officer said, turning to the other cop. Orange and Knot? Let's check that out. He looked at Hank again. Have you been having financial difficulties lately? He asked. Excuse me? Hank asked. Have you needed to borrow any money? No. Have you sold anything in the last 10 weeks? The cop suddenly turned their attention to me. Do people ever over looking for him? Does he ever ask you to hold something for him? Doesn't have to be big. I shook my head. No. The officer seemed displeased with my answer and frowned. I'm sorry. I'm going to need to take you back inside with your parents. Hank's a good guy, I yelled at the officer as the officer took my arm and dragged me away. The whole time I looked back at Hank, at the frustration and fury in his eyes as he said the words over and over, I didn't do it. I sat with my nose pressed up against the window, watching the police interrogate Hank. Several times I ran outside only to be escorted back in. See, the police know I'm right, Mr. Yao said, taking their interrogation of Hank as evidence that his theory about black people was valid. He was wrong. The only thing it proved was that the police officers were just like him. I counted the minutes until he and his racist thoughts would finally leave. Surprisingly, the person who remained most calm throughout the incident was Mr. Lawrence. It sounded like he had car insurance and he figured he could get the money back that way. At noon, the cops finally stopped interrogating Hank and got back in their cars. They didn't have enough evidence to make an arrest because he didn't do it, duh. but they said they'd be back. You'll hear from us again real soon, the commanding officer, Officer Phillips, said, looking at all of us. His eyes lingered especially long on Hank before he turned away. After the cops and Mr. Yao finally left, I went over to Hank's room. Hank was sitting in the chair, slumped over like half-filled sack. He looked absolutely exhausted. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It's all right, he said. It's not all right. They were awful. They just assumed you did it. How could they think that? The more I thought about it, the more riled up I got. But Hank just sat there, quiet and unfazed, gazing in the general direction of the pool. The sun burned through the window. I could see little tiny particles of dust floating in this room. Why are you not more upset? I asked him. He shrugged. Guess I'm just used to it, he said. This kind of thing happened to me all the time. It does? He nodded. To all black people in this country, in some way or other. He dropped his head into his hands. I sat very still, thinking about what he said. I could hear the faint honking of cars, a couple laughing in the room next to us. I wanted to scream, stop, stop honking, stop laughing. How can it be business as usual when this was happening to people like Hank? Hank got up and went to wash his face. When he returned, he was holding a pack of Oreos. As he set the Oreos down onto his little table, I stared at the cookies and thought about the world of difference there was between the two colors. Chapter 22. I sat at my desk with my hand over my tummy, not hearing a word Mrs. Douglas was saying. Wave after wave of nausea hit me every time I thought about the day before, the words Mr. Yao said, the words the cop said. I tried to drown them out, but they kept coming back. Jason turned to me and said, Hey, meet me at the auditorium during recess. I looked over at him. Sometimes I forgot how much he was the spitting image of his father. Please, Jason said, it's important. I was about to shake my head, but there was an urgency in his eyes I'd never seen before. Did his dad tell him what happened? Was that why he needed to talk to me? So he could apologize? At recess, I walked over to the auditorium. Jason was already inside waiting for me. He smiled when he saw me come in. He was holding something behind his back, dandelions, which he presented to me. These are for you, he said, stretching out his arm. He stared at the flowers, so warm and bright, in my downcast hands. You like them? He said. I nodded slowly. Good, Jason said, relieved. But what I really want is for your dad. I know. I'm going to tell him. As soon as he gets back from his business trip, I'm going to tell him, Jason said. I nodded. Good for him, for finally standing up to his dad. Excuse me. I don't care what he says, Jason said. He needs to know how much I like you. I stopped nodding. Wait, what? I asked. He grabbed my arms and looked into my eyes. I like you, Mia, he said again. I shook my head. No, no. I didn't want to believe it myself. I was like, how is this possible? Jason rattled off a mile a minute. But it's true. Whenever I'm around you, Mia, I get this tingly feeling. My insides twisted and turned. A slimy snake was zigzagging through me. The more Jason described, the more I squirmed. This isn't happening, I said, squeezing my eyes shut. I could feel my breakfast at the base of my throat. Oh, it's happening, he said, and it's going to be great. I turned to him. Jason, I don't like you, I exploded. Jason looked like he'd been punched. But you said you liked the flowers. You said you wanted me to tell my dad. I thought you were talking about your dad being a racist. Jason stepped back. My dad's not a racist, he said. Yes, he is, I gasped to fill my lungs. He's racist. Shut up, Jason yelled. No, you shut up. I looked at him hard. I could never like you. Never. Not even if you were the last boy on earth. I'd rather like a rock. He turned and ran. I stood in the auditorium listening to the echo of my words, feeling a tiny bit mean, yet 100% relieved. Jason didn't come back to class after recess. When I asked Mrs. Douglas said he wasn't feeling well and had to go home. Lupe immediately started poking me and asked me what happened. And when I finally told her, she wasn't even surprised. It makes sense, she said. I mean, you're both Chinese. How did that make sense? Just because we're both Chinese, we're supposed to like each other? What about the fact that he's evil and I'm not? Maybe it's a good thing, Lupe said. Maybe his dad will be nicer to your family from now on. I shook my head at her. The way I shot him down, There was no going back after that. There was only going it there was only going nuclear. I'm gonna stop here, my friends. I hope you have a great day today. I am going to try. We're about a third through our book, so I'm going to try to post another reading later this week so that we can get through it because we have about a month, actually less than a month now, before school ends. So I'm going to try to do another posting. I hope you have a great day. I miss you terribly. Post stuff in our classroom and see in our Google Classroom and see. Tell me about books that you're reading, what you're doing, how you are. I miss you terribly. Take care of yourselves. Wash your hands. Play outside. Enjoy your day. Happy Monday, everyone.